The battlefield was silent. Ash and smoke floated in the air like ghosts. Once there were cities here, voices, laughter, and dreams. Now only ruins and burned metal remained. Among the broken ground stood one last human soldier. His armor was cracked, his weapon was useless, but his eyes still burned with life. Above him, the sky split apart as a massive golden warship descended. It was shaped like a blade cutting through the clouds. Lightning danced around it, and waves of purple energy shook the ground. The humans called it the Crown of Oblivion. It was the ship of the Empress of Galactic, the ruler of 1,000 conquered worlds. The stories about her were more terrifying than death itself. They said she once erased an entire moon because someone defied her command. They said she ruled not through armies, but through fear. And now, she had come herself, to face the last human alive. The ground trembled as her ship's doors opened. A blinding light poured out, and from it, she walked. Tall, graceful, deadly. Her armor shimmered like liquid silver, flowing around her body with every step. Her eyes glowed violet, like two stars burning with cold fire. Around her, alien guards bowed, but she did not look at them. Her gaze was fixed only on the human. He stood there, bleeding, exhausted, yet unbroken. He looked up at her and whispered, "So, this is how humanity ends." The Empress tilted her head, curious. Her voice was soft but sharp like glass. "You speak without permission, human." He smiled weakly. "Permission? You destroyed everything I had. What more can you take?" For the first time in centuries, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, not power, but something she did not recognize. Emotion. She raised her glowing sword, the edge humming with energy. The soldiers around her expected the human to turn to dust in seconds. But he didn't move. He stood there, steady, looking straight into the eyes of the deadliest being in the galaxy. That look pierced through her armor. He wasn't afraid, and that made her heartbeat quicken. She lowered her weapon slightly, studying him like a strange new species. "You are not like the others," she said quietly, almost to herself. The human's reply was calm. "Maybe because I'm the last." Her fingers trembled on the hilt of her sword. Something inside her, something buried for centuries, started to wake. She took a step closer, her silver cape brushing against the ashes. The human didn't back away. He only whispered, "If you're going to kill me, do it now." The Empress stopped. Her voice dropped to a whisper that made even her soldiers freeze. "Kill you?" she said slowly, her tone changing. "No, human, you interest me." The blade at his throat began to glow brighter. He could see his reflection in her eyes. Her breath was calm, her face emotionless, but her voice trembled. She leaned closer, so near that he could see tiny sparks of energy dancing on her skin. Then she whispered words no one expected to hear from her. "Kiss me, or be vaporized." The world seemed to stop. The soldiers gasped, unsure if they had heard correctly. The human blinked, shocked, thinking it was a cruel joke. But her eyes were serious, the same eyes that had seen galaxies burn. He felt his heart pound. He didn't know if this was mercy or madness. But in that single moment, he saw something real behind her cruel mask: loneliness. He lowered his weapon slowly. The silence stretched across the battlefield like a frozen river. Every soldier, every drone, every machine stopped moving. The Empress waited, her glowing blade still pointed at his chest. The human stepped closer, his voice quiet. "And if I refuse?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then, human, you will die, but at least you will die interesting." He looked at her one last time, not as an enemy, not as a god, but as someone who had lost everything, just like him. And for the first time in all of history, the galaxy's deadliest empress hesitated. Not because of fear, not because of defeat, but because of a single human who refused to bow. The air shimmered with tension. The sword still glowed between them. The human's hand rose slowly. And somewhere in the heart of the empire, destiny began to change. The soldiers watched in silence as the humans stood before their empress. No one had ever defied her gaze. No one had ever survived this close to her blade. The empress could feel the eyes of her army waiting for the order to fire. But her lips refused to speak that word. Instead, she studied the human with quiet fascination. His clothes were torn, his armor burned, yet he stood proud. There was defiance in his eyes, not arrogance, but something stronger, hope. She found it strange, almost absurd, how someone so fragile could stare into death and not tremble. Her generals shifted uneasily, unsure if their queen had lost her mind. One of them finally spoke, his metallic voice echoing through the air. "Your Majesty, give the command, and we will erase him." The Empress turned slowly, her violet eyes glowing brighter. Her tone was calm but filled with authority. "No one touches him." The soldiers froze. Even her war generals lowered their heads. She had never spoken those words for any creature before. It was the first time in 1,000 years that mercy had been heard from her lips. The human still said nothing. He only met her stare with quiet determination. When she moved closer, he did not step back. Instead, he whispered softly, "You're afraid." The air around them cracked with energy. Her soldiers raised their weapons instantly, but she raised her hand to stop them. Her expression hardened. "Afraid? Of what?" He smiled faintly, his voice trembling but firm. "Afraid to feel something." Those words struck deeper than any weapon could. For a moment, the mighty Empress felt her armor grow heavy. Memories long buried clawed at her heart. Faces, laughter, warmth, all gone. Her empire had given her everything, but it had taken her soul in return. She turned away sharply, hiding the small flicker of emotion behind her mask. "Take him to the lower decks," she ordered coldly. "I will decide his fate later." Her guards obeyed, but none dared to question why she walked beside him herself. The path to the ship was lined with alien soldiers, tall and armored. They all bowed as she passed, but their eyes followed the human with hatred and confusion. Inside the ship, everything glowed with violet light. Walls breathed softly like living metal. The human looked around, amazed, even as guards pushed him forward. He whispered to himself, "So this is how gods travel." The Empress heard it and almost smiled. Almost. When they reached the containment hall, she stopped the guards. "Leave us," she said quietly. The soldiers hesitated, then left, sealing the chamber. Only she and the human remained, the sound of the ship's heartbeat filling the silence. She walked to the window, looking at the endless stars outside. "You humans," she said slowly, "you burn your worlds, fight your own kind, and yet you look at the stars as if you own them." He replied, "Maybe we don't own them, but we never stop reaching." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "Why did you not kneel?" she asked, her voice softer now. He looked at her calmly. "Because kneeling is for those who've given up." His answer lingered in the air like music she didn't understand. Something inside her cracked again, the echo of a feeling she thought extinct. She stepped closer, her armor shimmering with faint light. "You should hate me," she whispered. "I destroyed your people." He nodded slowly. "I do," he said, "but I also pity you." Those words pierced through her chest like a silent weapon. No one had ever pitied her, not even dared. She could feel her breath grow heavier, her pulse unsteady. She turned away before he could see the confusion in her eyes. Her voice returned to its cold tone. "You will stay alive, for now." The human looked at her one last time. There was no fear in his eyes, only curiosity. He simply said, "You could kill me anytime, but you won't." The Empress froze at those words. For the first time, she realized he might be right. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She only walked away, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the glowing corridor. When the door closed behind her, she placed a hand over her heart. It was racing, something she hadn't felt in centuries. She looked at her reflection in the shining metal wall. Her eyes were still fierce, still royal, yet now they held something new, something dangerous, something human. Days passed within the glowing walls of the Empress's flagship. The human was kept in a chamber that was neither a prison nor a room. It was surrounded by shimmering light, humming softly like a living creature. Every time he touched the walls, they rippled as if breathing. He was watched by unseen eyes, but strangely, he never felt threatened. The Empress visited often, though she never said why. At first she asked questions about humanity, about Earth, about emotions. But soon her visits became silent. She would stand there, watching him as if searching for something she had lost long ago. He didn't bow, didn't beg, didn't curse. He simply looked back with calm eyes, and that made her restless. One evening, the ship drifted through a nebula of violet light. The view from the observation deck was like a painting made of stars. The human stood there, staring at the beauty outside. When she entered, her presence filled the air with quiet power. He turned slowly and said softly, "Do you ever look at them, or do you only see targets?" Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "Stars are not for looking. They are for ruling," she said. He shook his head. "That's why you'll never understand them." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her gaze moved to the stars, and for the first time, he saw sadness in her eyes. A silence stretched between them, heavy, delicate, human. Finally she spoke. "Once, I was not like this." Her voice was low, almost trembling. "Before the throne, before the wars, there was peace and laughter." He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "What happened?" She turned away, her armor reflecting the starlight like tears. "They took it from me," she said. "The council, the generals, the empire itself." Her fingers brushed the window, leaving faint sparks of energy. "They said emotions made rulers weak, so I buried them, until nothing was left but the crown." The human's heart ached at her words. He realized she wasn't a monster. She was a woman forced to become one. He whispered, "And now you found me." She looked at him, her eyes glowing softly. "You remind me of what I destroyed." Before she could speak further, a sharp alarm echoed through the ship. Red light flashed across the walls. A metallic voice rang out. "Security breach in core chamber." The Empress straightened instantly, her expression cold again. She turned to him, "Stay here," and vanished in a flash of light. The human, curious, moved to the door. It slid open without resistance, as if the ship itself allowed him to pass. He followed the sound of voices through glowing corridors until he reached a vast chamber. There he saw something impossible, a giant crystal heart, floating in the air. It pulsed with blue light, and within it, images flickered, memories, faces, laughter, and sorrow. The Empress stood before it, alone, her hand resting on the crystal surface. He watched silently, realizing this was no weapon. It was her heart, her past, her pain, her humanity trapped in energy form. She turned sharply when she felt his presence. Her eyes burned with both anger and shame. "You were told to stay," she said, her voice shaking. He didn't flinch. "I had to see what you're hiding from yourself." Her expression softened for a moment. Then she whispered, "This is what remains of my soul." He stepped closer, mesmerized by the glowing crystal. Inside it, he saw a young woman laughing under alien skies, free, alive, happy. It was her, before she became the Empress. He whispered, "You still have it." She shook her head slowly. "No, human, it's only a memory." The chamber trembled suddenly, as an explosion rocked the ship. "Alarms!" screamed again. "Rebel fleet incoming!" shouted a voice through the comms. The Empress clenched her fists, the light around her flaring brighter. "They come for my throne," she said coldly. The human looked at her. "Then let me fight beside you." She stared at him, disbelief flashing across her face. "You would die for me?" she asked. He replied simply, "No, I'll live for you." For the first time, her heart, the real one, skipped a beat. Her hand touched his cheek, glowing faintly. "You're either brave," she whispered, "or completely foolish." He smiled, "Maybe both." Outside, warships appeared from the nebula, their weapons lighting up the dark. Inside, the Empress stood beside the human. And as the alarms echoed, she realized something terrifying. The deadliest Empress in the galaxy no longer feared death. She feared losing the one human who made her feel alive again. The Empress stood at the command deck, watching the nebula outside pulse with enemy signals. Her empire was under siege, yet her thoughts were not on the battle. They were on him, the human who spoke to her like she was not a god, not a queen, but a person. She tried to erase the memory of his words, but they echoed in her mind like a heartbeat. "I'll live for you," he had said, and that simple sentence broke something she had spent centuries protecting. She walked through the silent corridors of her flagship, her guards bowing low as she passed. But she was not heading to the throne room or the war chamber. She was going somewhere she hadn't gone in years, the place her empire called the Forbidden Garden. The air changed as she entered. The cold metallic smell of the ship gave way to warmth, to the scent of soil, rain, and something almost forgotten, life. Inside, glowing plants from 100 conquered worlds bloomed. silver trees, blue vines, and flowers that floated instead of growing. In the center stood a small patch of green, earth grass, fragile but alive. It was the only living reminder of the world she had destroyed. And tonight, she brought the last human to see it. The door opened behind her with a low hum. The human stepped in, his eyes wide. He whispered softly, "This place, it's beautiful." She turned slightly, her expression unreadable. "Beauty is dangerous. It makes you forget what must be done." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why you keep it hidden." Her heart tightened at those words. No one had ever dared to speak to her like that, not even her generals. She looked at the plants, her voice softer now. "These came from worlds that defied me," she said. "I took their beauty so I could never forget their mistakes." He touched one of the silver leaves gently. "Or maybe you kept them because you couldn't destroy them completely." She turned to him sharply, but there was no anger in her eyes, only confusion. He continued quietly, "You could have wiped this garden out, but you didn't. That means something." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She wanted to say he was wrong, that she was still the empress of 1,000 worlds. But deep inside, she knew he was right. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken truths. He looked around, his gaze falling on a small glass case in the center of the garden. Inside it was a single red rose, perfectly preserved. He asked softly, "From Earth?" She nodded, her voice almost a whisper. "It was given to me before I became what I am." He frowned. "Given by who?" Her eyes grew distant. "By someone who saw me not as an empress, but as a girl." The moment hung between them like the air before a storm. The human took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Then maybe it's time to find her again." She met his gaze, and for the first time, her armor faded into soft light. The woman beneath it looked younger, tired, but heartbreakingly beautiful. Her silver hair glowed faintly in the light of the garden, her eyes not of power now, but pain. He reached out gently, brushing his fingers against her hand. She didn't pull away. A voice broke the moment. The ship's AI, cold and mechanical. "Alert, rebel fleet approaching in attack formation." Her face hardened instantly, the Empress returning like a mask pulled over her heart. She turned away, her cape swirling like starlight. "I have a war to end," she said. But the human stepped forward, his voice steady. "Then let me fight beside you." She paused, halfway to the door. Every part of her training screamed to reject him, to remind him of his place. Yet something stronger than logic held her still. She turned, her eyes glowing faintly. "You do not understand what happens to those who stand beside me." He smiled. "Maybe not, but I understand what happens to those who stand alone." Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat, she saw her reflection in his eyes. Not as a ruler, not as a monster, but as someone who could still be saved. The alarms grew louder, shaking the garden. She took one last look at the rose under glass, then whispered, "If you die, it's on my hands." He replied softly, "Then make sure I don't." They left the garden together, the doors closing behind them with a whisper of wind. The vines trembled as if alive, the rose glowed faintly brighter. Outside, the enemy fleet surrounded the flagship. Inside, an empress and a human walked side by side, not ruler and prisoner, but two souls about to defy an empire built on fear. And somewhere deep within the ship, the heart of the empress, that crystal of memory, began to pulse again. Its light brighter than it had been in centuries. It sensed change, and it whispered silently to the stars. The Empress of Galactic was no longer alone. The halls of the flagship trembled as explosions echoed through the void. Outside, the rebel fleet spread across the stars like a storm of fire. Dozens of ships turned their weapons toward the royal vessel, their lights flashing crimson. Inside, the Empress stood tall in the war chamber, surrounded by her generals. Holographic maps glowed in the air, showing the enemy's advance. Her commanders shouted for orders, their voices clashing with alarm sirens. But she said nothing, her gaze fixed on the image of the rebellion's leader. It was her own high council, the very people she once trusted. They had chosen this moment to strike, believing her distracted and weak. One of them appeared on the hollow screen, his metallic eyes gleaming coldly. "Your Majesty, step down. The Empire cannot follow a ruler who protects a human." The room fell silent. The Empress's fingers tightened around her staff of light. Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut the air. "You dare question my command?" The general bowed mockingly. "You've lost your mind, my queen. We will not die for your affection." With a gesture of her hand, the transmission ended, the screen shattering into sparks. The human stood in the corner of the room, his hands bound, but his eyes calm. He could feel the tension rising, the weight of countless lives pressing down on her shoulders. He took a breath and said quietly, "Let me go. They're doing this because of me." She turned sharply, her expression fierce. "You think I would surrender to them? You think I would trade one life for my honor?" He met her gaze. "Sometimes mercy is strength." She looked away, the words striking deeper than he could imagine. Outside the windows, the stars lit up with cannon fire. The flagship rocked violently, throwing guards to the ground. Smoke filled the corridors as red lights flashed in warning. The Empress steadied herself, her armor flickering with energy. Her soldiers looked at her, waiting for orders, their loyalty trembling under fear. She raised her head high, her voice echoing through the chamber. "All forces, fall back to Formation 3. I will handle the council myself." The guards hesitated, unsure if they heard correctly. She added, "The human stays under my protection. Anyone who disobeys dies by my hand." The entire room froze. Even the AI of the ship paused for a fraction of a second, trying to process what its ruler had just said. The human stared at her in disbelief. "You're risking everything," he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly. "Maybe for the first time, it's for something real." The rebellion's flagship came into view, a massive black vessel shaped like a crown turned upside down. It fired a beam of energy that split through the void, slamming into her shields. The impact shook the ship, shattering lights and hurling soldiers across the floor. Her captain screamed over the comms, "Shields failing. Core at 40%. The Empress gritted her teeth, her energy flaring brighter. "Redirect power from the weapon systems to the defense grid and prepare boarding pods." Her chief general stepped forward, his voice trembling with fury. "Your Majesty, if we focus on defense, we cannot strike back." She turned to him, her expression colder than ice. "You think I care about striking back? I care about ending this without destroying everything I built." The general clenched his fists. "You've gone soft." Before he could say more, her blade flashed. A streak of violet light cut across the room, and silence fell again. The general collapsed, his armor still glowing from the cut. Her voice was calm. "Anyone else questioning my strength?" No one answered. The human stepped forward, ignoring the smoke and chaos. He whispered, "You didn't have to kill him." She didn't look at him. "He forgot who I am." He sighed. "No, I think you're starting to remember who you were." Her breath caught, her mind spinning between power and feeling. Every word from him made the walls of her pride tremble. The enemy ships broke through the outer defenses. Boarding crafts attached to her flagship like parasites. Alarms blared again. Enemy forces breaching level 12. She turned to the human, her decision made. "You stay close to me. Human, I will not lose you to them." Together they moved through the corridors, lights flickering, walls shaking. Alien soldiers poured in from every side, energy bolts slicing the air. The human grabbed a fallen weapon, covering her flank. She glanced at him, surprised by his aim, his bravery, his calm. Side by side, they fought through the chaos. An empress and a human, once enemies, now bound by something neither of them fully understood. When the smoke cleared, only silence remained. The flagship drifted through debris, fire glowing faintly outside the windows. The Empress lowered her blade, her breath unsteady. She looked at the human and whispered, "They will call me traitor." He replied quietly, "Then be a traitor to fear, not to yourself." Her eyes softened, a single tear glowing like starlight on her cheek. For the first time, she didn't hide it. Because somewhere in the middle of rebellion and ruin, the deadliest empress in the galaxy had made her most the galaxy burned outside her windows. Fire streaked across the void, painting the stars in red and gold. The empress stood at the heart of her throne chamber, her armor cracked, her crown flickering with sparks. Every sound of battle echoed through the ship like a heartbeat. But her focus was not on the war, it was on the human standing before her. He was wounded, his arm wrapped in bandages, his eyes tired but steady. He refused to rest, refused to leave her side. The room shook again as another explosion hit. The lights dimmed. "They're breaking through," he said quietly. She looked at the burning sky beyond the glass and whispered, "Let them come." Around them, the empire was collapsing. Her fleets were in chaos, her generals scattered or dead. The council had declared her a fallen ruler, a danger to the galaxy. Yet here she stood, unyielding, with one fragile human beside her. She smiled faintly, a mix of pride and sorrow. "It's strange," she said softly. "I've fought for centuries and never felt alive until I started losing everything." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You haven't lost everything." Her eyes met his. "Haven't I? My empire, my soldiers, my power, all gone." He shook his head. "You still have your heart, and right now, it's worth more than every star out there." She looked away, her voice trembling for the first time. "You shouldn't have come into my world." He smiled sadly. "Then you shouldn't have let me stay." Before either could speak again, the door burst open. The rebellion's commander entered, armor gleaming with blood and fire. He was one of her oldest allies, now turned against her. "My queen," he sneered, "your rule ends tonight." His soldiers surrounded the chamber, weapons aimed. The empress lifted her head, her eyes burning with violet fire. "You dare step into my throne and call yourself loyal?" He raised his weapon. "You are no longer fit to rule." She raised her hand, and the entire floor trembled. Energy surged through her veins. Light rippled around her body. Every wound she carried began to glow. Every scar turned to flame. The soldiers stumbled as the air filled with raw power. The commander shouted, "You'll destroy us all." She smiled faintly. "That's the idea." The human ran forward, grabbing her arm. "Stop," he shouted. "You'll kill yourself." Her energy flared brighter, nearly blinding. "This is the only way to end it," she said, her voice echoing through the ship. "If I die, the rebellion dies with me, and peace will return." He shook his head desperately. "That's not peace. That's surrender." She looked at him, her expression softening. "Then let me surrender to you." The world slowed, every sound fading into silence. She turned toward him fully, her blade dissolving into light. Her hands trembled as she reached for his face. "You made me remember what it means to feel," she whispered. "But I was never meant to love." He held her hand tightly, his voice breaking. "You don't get to decide that. Not anymore." The rebellion's soldiers opened fire. Bolts of light tore through the room, exploding against the walls. The human pushed her behind a shattered column, shielding her with his body. She screamed, her voice shaking the ship. "No!" The energy around her exploded outward, disintegrating everything in a burst of purple light. The shockwave threw ships off course, silenced engines, and froze the stars themselves. When the light faded, the rebellion fleet hung motionless in orbit. Their systems dead, their power gone. Inside the throne room, everything was still. The empress knelt beside the human, his armor cracked, his breathing faint. She touched his face with trembling fingers, her tears glowing like fire. "Why did you save me?" she whispered. He smiled weakly. "Because someone had to." She leaned closer, her crown falling to the floor. Her lips brushed his forehead, her voice breaking. "You foolish, beautiful creature." He looked at her one last time. "You said you'd destroy everything." She nodded softly. "I did, except you." The ship groaned as its systems failed. The last of her energy poured into his body, healing him as her own began to fade. Her glow dimmed, her breath slowed. The human shouted her name, but it was too late. Her last words were a whisper carried through the air like music. "Live for me, human. Let them know I was more than a crown." And with that, the galaxy's deadliest empress fell silent. Her empire crumbled, but her legend began. For among the ashes of rebellion and ruin, one truth remained. That love, once awakened, could not be conquered, not even by the stars, human choice. Silence filled the stars. The great flagship drifted among broken ships and fading light. Once, it was the center of fear, the throne of the galaxy's deadliest empress. Now it was only a tomb of glass and fire. Inside its shattered halls, the human awoke, surrounded by the soft hum of dying engines. He called her name, his voice echoing in the silence. No answer came. only the flicker of purple light fading across the throne room. Her crown lay beside him, cracked and dim. He touched it gently, feeling warmth still trapped within the metal. He whispered, "You kept your promise." Everywhere he looked, the ship bore the scars of her sacrifice. Walls melted into crystal, corridors glowing with soft violet mist. It felt like the ship itself was grieving. He stood slowly, his body weak but alive. She had saved him, given him everything she had left. He found her lying at the center of the chamber, surrounded by light. Her armor was gone, her face peaceful, her silver hair flowing like starlight. She looked as if she were sleeping. He knelt beside her, trembling. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in a whisper barely louder than breath, he said, "You called me human, but you were the most human of us all." He leaned forward and pressed his lips softly against hers. The touch was gentle, filled with everything words could never carry. The light around her body shimmered brighter. And for a moment, he felt warmth, like the beating of a heart through the stars. Then the glow spread outward, traveling through the ship like a wave. Every shattered wall, every broken circuit began to pulse with life. Outside, the galaxy watched in silence as the Empress's flagship ignited. But it was not fire. It was light, pure and beautiful. From the ship's core, a beam of violet energy reached into the sky. It touched the rebel fleets, disabling their weapons but leaving them unharmed. It reached planets, moons, and cities once ruled by fear. And wherever it touched, people felt something strange, peace. For the first time in history, the galaxy was quiet. No war, no screams, only stillness. The energy faded, leaving behind a field of glowing dust that danced across space. The flagship, now empty, drifted toward a nearby star. And from within it, a message echoed across every communication channel. It was her voice, calm and soft. "I was not born to destroy. I was born to feel. Let no empire rise on fear again." The human fell to his knees, tears falling freely. He knew what she had done. She had turned her power into a gift. Her final act was not of conquest, but creation. He looked at the crown one last time, then stood. He whispered, "You changed the galaxy, and you changed me." Years passed. The story spread from world to world, retold by travelers, merchants, and poets. They called it the tale of the human and the Empress. Some said she was a goddess who fell in love with a mortal. Others said she was a tyrant redeemed by one act of mercy. But the truth remained hidden in the stars, known only to him. He never returned to Earth. Instead, he built a small station among the ruins of her empire. He filled it with flowers, the same silver vines and blue trees from her garden. At its heart grew a single red rose, glowing faintly under alien light. Each day, he spoke to her as if she could still hear him. "They think you're gone," he would say softly, "but you're everywhere." And sometimes, when the winds of space brushed against the station walls, he heard a whisper, faint, distant, familiar. "Live for me, human." He would close his eyes, feeling the warmth of her presence in the air. And though the galaxy had lost its empress, it had found something far greater. It had found love in the place it least expected, between two souls from different worlds. Centuries later, explorers found the station still floating near a star. The garden was alive, untouched by time. At its center lay the rose, blooming eternally. Beneath it, carved into the stone, were 7 simple words. She taught the stars how to love again. And so her legend lived on, whispered by starlight, sung by travelers. The deadliest empress who demanded a kiss. And in that single kiss, saved the galaxy.